this week, the big story on the continent revolves around the International Criminal Court and the goings-on in Addis Ababa currently, where the special summit of heads of state will be discussing, among other issues, but mainly the decision to pull out of the ICC, and a couple of issues are going to be discussed alongside that. Uhuru Kenyatta is currently there. He's probably the centerpiece of this discussion with regard to Kenya's strained relationship with the ICC. And of course, we have a guest in studio. Joining us from our city center studios is Nanjira Sambuli. We're going to be talking to her later on in the show. We've also got Gaurem D from Tanzania, as well as Robert Shivambu from 98.7 Power FM in Johannesburg, South Africa. But first though, let's get into our first segment, Click. Today we bring you various pictures of the Kenya team at the Gold Coast in Australia, as well as others doing the rounds on social media now. The reason? The team has just qualified for their quarterfinals of the Gold Coast Sevens and will either play Samoa or Australia. Not only are they representing Kenya, but on rugby's world stage, they are alongside South Africa as a core team of the IRB Sevens circuit representing Africa. Now on to Web City, and today we look at the question facing many Kenyans and indeed many Africans. Will President Uhuru Kenyatta show up for his trial at the ICC in the Netherlands? KTN Samogina looks at what's been going on in Kenya and brings us this report.
I would want that case.
Former ODM strongman Fred Gumo has resurfaced to back calls urging President Uhuru Kenyatta to skip his forthcoming trial in November at the ICC. Gumo, whose party is a strong advocate of the Hague cases, has scoffed at the court, saying the ICC should shelve the trial till President Kenyatta has served his term.
I would want that case ilale mpaka siku ile atatoka. Kwa maana yeye atakuwa president ya maisha. Siku nyingine atatoka. Wangoje. Kwani judges ambao kama hawako suma judges wengine watakuwako. Waweke hiyo kitu kando, tumalize mambo yetu hapa.
The former cabinet minister warned that the ICC's plan to prosecute a sitting president will precipitate a power vacuum in the country. In sheer defiance of the court and its processes against the president, Gumo fired at former chief mediator Kofi Annan for predicting about the country should Kenya withdraw from the ICC.
Hata ukienda kwa UN, watu wengi ambao wanafanya kazi including Annan himself, alienda huko kwa maana Ghana ilikuwa na shida. Wanafikiri alienda huko kwa raha.
Gumo's remarks come hot on the heels of the warning by Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed against ICC trying an incumbent, begging the question, is President Uhuru Kenyatta preparing ground to abscond his trial?
President of the Republic of Kenya, the president that embodies our sovereignty, our freedom and our liberty, that president be allowed to attend the court via video link. Now it's up to the court to actually decide what they want to happen. And so as they make that decision, they have to take into consideration the need to balance the interests of running this country.
But the deal breaker in his offensive to forestall a foreign trial is Africa Union Heads of State Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia on Saturday. Already the AU has rallied most African nations on a planned continental pullout from the Rome Statute should the ICC insist on prosecuting African sitting heads of state. President Uhuru Kenyatta has traveled for the crucial summit that may seal his fate on whether to travel or defy the Hague-based court. This as Deputy President William Ruto returns home to hold brief to avert a power vacuum during his short break.
politically speaking, at least Fred Gumo's opinions on whether Uhuru Kenyatta should or shouldn't attend the ICC trials slated for November the 12th will be interesting to watch, politically speaking, here in Kenya. But now joining us to discuss the continental aspect of the trial of the ICC and specifically what the narrative has been in the media, both in Kenya and in different parts of the world, is researcher and strategist, new media researcher and strategist, Nanjira Sambuli. Nanjira, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, John.
Nanjira, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, welcome to the program, Nanjira. Before we kick off on our discussion, I wanted to put you on the spot a little and ask, what do you think of this narrative about the continental pullout of the ICC by African states that's currently being discussed?
It's very interesting to just see what the driving narrative has been based on the different people covering it. One very interesting aspect, if I may quote what the Foreign Minister talked about, that no sitting precedent has ever been tried. But how it was framed is such that having a precedent right now being tried is actually something that is not in the book or in the law. But today, just today, the prosecution has clarified by what has been broadcast by media that, in fact, it's possible and within the law. And so, therefore, it's very interesting to see whether that sort of narrative that is a sort of rebuttal to what has been uttered is part of that narrative that is going to be taking dominance in the conversation.
All right, Nanjira, we'll continue with this discussion. I just want to play a clip that sort of puts in perspective what the ICC is thinking about Africa's seeming decision. We don't know yet whether that continental pullout will be supported. Africa's decision to pull out of the ICC, of course. But Fatou Bensouda has spoken about this very many times. And here's a clip on what she said. This is courtesy of Waiamu Foundation, www.waiamu.com.
ICC's alleged pursuit of weaker states in the international scheme of geopolitical power, states in Africa being the biggest drivers of this.
Africa has been coming towards the ICC. Africa, from the time it was to be established, I don't need to repeat what happened. There are many people in this room today who know what happened and the role that Africa has played in making sure that the ICC was established. The first cases of the ICC were referrals from Africa. Africa requested ICC's intervention. In fact, this idea of Africa, ICC targeting Africa, I think was completely demystified again when Mali, as recent as July of this year, requested again the ICC's intervention.
I think it's in the interest of justice, and I think it's in the interest of the reputation of the ICC that the court stretch its work beyond Africa. By doing so, I think the court is going to deny powerful African tyrants the stick with which they so easily and distractingly wave at the ICC.
All right, Fatou Bensouda has been consistent in her opinion that Africa actually did invite the ICC into the various countries that are signatories to the Rome Statute. Nanjira, 34 of the 121 signatories to the Rome Statute are actually African states. Do you think that this is a narrative that's coming out as in Kenyan media as well as in media across the continent, that 34 of the states out of the 121 signatories to the Rome Statute actually are African states, and that they were part and parcel of the drive to form the Rome Statute?
What I've found interesting is that when we look at broadcast media, this is not a narrative as dominant as it is in print publications and online publications of the various news media. So you find that kind of information about how even each country went about ratifying the ICC, each African state rather, is something you find at the back of some analytical, piece that has been written by someone. Now, I can't speak of actively having seen that becoming a dominant narrative, especially in broadcast media. While it's there in the general scope of things, I think it's still very important that we focus on the fact that there's a reason why we are where we are right now. And it's not coming up from the process of how Africa got there and how each individual country that's actually a signatory got there.
Yeah, and actually that's something that's being discussed across the continent. I want to bring Robert Shivambu from 98.7 Power FM in Johannesburg into this discussion. Robert, what do you think the level of interest is in South Africa on the ICC?
Well, we started seeing much interest around the International Criminal Court following the indictment of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir in 2009. So right now what we are seeing has been much interest on the indictment or the cases that are being faced by Kenyan politicians, President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto. So a lot of people are beginning to talk about it because they believe that there are some elements of undermining by the court, undermining leadership, and that has been the driving or the biggest debate in the country around the International Criminal Court and its work.
Undermining the leadership and the sovereignty of African states is something that's kept on coming out. Nanjira, I just want to bring you into this. Do you think that this colonial monkey on our back narrative is something that we should harp on or explain to its logical conclusion? Is it something that's been coming out as well?
It's definitely been coming up, and I think especially in written and print publication, a lot of the opinion pieces that are going up underline that, so to speak, narrative about undermining the leadership. But the thing that is not being pointed is at the whole picture of why we're here right now. Yes, we have a president who we voted in as Kenyans, in spite of the fact that we had a case before the ICC to answer. And that definitely has introduced a very interesting dynamic. However, what we're talking about, undermining of leadership, I think the big question is, are we looking at leadership as an institution or leadership as people? And those who are in leadership right now, which in our case is the president and deputy president, is their leader, how are they being incorporated in this conversation about undermining leadership? Who is doing the undermining of this leadership? I don't think it's the ICC, in my personal opinion. We need to revisit how we define leadership. Is it around people or is it around institutions? In this case, the institution of the president in Kenya.
Interesting. Actually, Robert pointed that out when he was talking about the level of interest in South Africa, that it's mostly around the fact that Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto seem to be targeted. But one thing that I want to sit back and hear from you is about victims. How much are we talking about victims? And this is something that I've been seeing on social media as we tease this discussion, Nanjira.
The conversation about the victims and the quest for justice is definitely taking a backseat. And I think in this case, I will speak of what I've seen as far as broadcasting of the issue goes and as far as the writing around the issue goes. The big question that a lot of people are asking online, I will say, is where is the narrative about the victims? Where are we in our reconciliation process? From the meeting that the foreign ministers had yesterday at the AU summit, they talked about putting up a special tribunal or session to just look into how Kenya is faring in its reconciliation process. But you don't see that coming to the fore of the conversation. We're still driven by the events that are taking place, and that's somehow subtly or even directly keeping the narrative that our leadership or our leaders are being undermined. But this question about victims is also not being paused. What are their thoughts as the leaders who are actually holding up these institutions at this time? What is their view around the justice that should be served at the end of the day? So we're not seeing that narrative taking predominant, attention in the conversation. And I think it's a bit worrying, and it's something that we need to bring back, to rein back in. And I think it's something media really needs to do a double take on.
Over and above leaders talking about the victims, are we being a bit too condescending in our own narrative as media about the victims themselves, going to IDP camps, shining our cameras and our lights there and saying, okay, these guys are still suffering? Should we have more nuanced or more wider focus on what exactly victimhood is in order to bring this back into the front seat, Nanjira?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's exactly as you say. When you see the focus on victims, it's about either when some politician or media themselves on these IDP camps that some have been, but they tend to settle. So 5-7 years on, how are they coping? What is that story being humanized? So we actually have put them, rightfully so to speak, in a condescending manner. There's this whole big picture. And then, unfortunately, the other thing that's emerging is we're starting to paint President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President as the victims. It's actually very worrying to see that. And that's coming up more from the nuances that are being put forth by media. And so this narrative is a bit worrying, to be honest.
Actually, the level of interest in victimhood is not something that, or rather is something that we should be focusing on. Nanjira will just try and work on your sound as we get back to you. But let's take you now to Tanzania. Gaure Mdi, the social media and features editor of Fema magazine in Tanzania, he's been following the story on the International Criminal Court. Recently, the AG of Tanzania was among leaders that wrote to the International Criminal Court questioning its role in Kenya and in Africa. Gaure, I wonder, what is the level of interest in Tanzania about the International Criminal Court? Yes, they are neighbors of ours, but is it really something that is too far removed?
The ICC proceedings have generated quite a bit of interest around Tanzania for those who are aware of it. For those who are, and people they have mixed feelings. They have they're those who are for it, for the ICC proceedings, and those who are against it. The ones who are for it, you find, will generally be like, listen, a crime was committed, and when a criminal commits a crime, they must go to court, be it ICC or any other body. Those who are against it are generally of the idea, like is the popular idea right now, that the ICC is on a general witch hunt for any African leader out there right now, and so this is how they feel, and it really is something that has stuck out in the social media and just general discussions. One guy came to me 2 days ago and tells me, look, kama jamaa ni jambazi kiasi hicho, kwa nini walimchagua kama rais? So yeah, those are the kind of things people say around here. Yeah.
Very interesting encapsulation of the issue there from Tanzania. We'll be getting back to you, Gaura, in just a moment. Let me read you some of our feedback on the subject about whether the media is covering the narrative properly. Svet M, this is on Twitter, Svet M says that Omar Bashir is a fugitive of the law and the rest are not in power. That's with regard to the warrant of arrest against Omar Bashir. Let's see another one here. The narrative of no president having been prosecuted is naive, only that he volunteered to attend. That's Vet M again. Let's see if we can get someone else here to talk about it. The media has been one-sided in its coverage, more about leaders and very little about the victims and unbiased and disadvantages of the ICC. Brigante says, or rather, let's read someone else's. Brigante is talking about another product on KTN, which will be coming soon. But Wanjiro Mwaneki says that the media, not at all, but I get it, it's a good thing. Too much information on the wrong ears could be a calamity. Now, not at all, I'm not sure whether she means that the media hasn't covered it well or that it's covered it extremely well, that it doesn't deserve any criticism. Wanjiro, maybe you can clarify that for us. But let's return to our discussion with Nanjira. Nanjira, if you can hear me, again, there's something that perhaps isn't coming out in terms of what the media is covering, and this is across the continent. The point is that these are ongoing proceedings in a courtroom. Are we exposing ourselves as a media, not just here but in Africa, to subdue this?
What has been interesting to read about in terms of especially the analysis on media coverage has been how far media, and especially Kenyan media, has gone towards covering the process. We've had situations of the witnesses being outed, and in fact, I was just reading about it this morning that apparently, I believe it was KTN that actually interviewed the family of one witness, and so this is a bit going to beyond. I think in the zeal to sort of cover the process, as you rightfully put it, there's bounds that have not been properly defined, and I think this is going to present a very interesting thing going forward, even in terms of how much media will be allowed to cover the processes. One witness, we had to see that the proceedings go behind closed sessions because of that kind of coverage and the outing that was happening. Now, the thing is, the narrative at the end of the day, yes, is episodic, it's about the ongoing events, but where is the background context? What is the underlying context that we're carrying forth is every event that is being covered? That is a bit wanting in terms of, and especially Kenyan coverage of the situation. You find that perhaps with other media, and especially international media, and even new media where we have bloggers and other analysts writing, they're trying to cover more in the context to supplement what is going forth. Now, the thing is, mainstream media has a wide reach, and so the narrative that they put forth is what informs what people think about Not necessarily what they think, but what they think about the process. And so even how people react is largely driven by this. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the other beautiful thing that new media brings is this feedback that the mainstream media can take into their coverage as we go out beyond events and to tie events in context.
Okay, Robert Chivambo in Johannesburg. What is the South African take on some of the narratives that have been coming out in Kenyan media as well as media across the country? Or rather across the continent, especially as regards the ICC narrative, the anti-ICC narrative. But before that, let's talk to Gaurem D from Tanzania about the interest again and the narratives that are being played out in the media in Tanzania, a neighbor of ours. Let's see whether there's anything there. Gaurem, what do you think of the narratives there?
I can't quite say that there's been like a set narrative on the whole ICC proceedings in Tanzania. Media houses haven't really picked up the story as a favorable one. It hasn't gotten that much prominence, except when there's a political member or a person in the political sphere in Tanzania who's doing something related to the ICC proceedings. I'll give you an example. Our AG Werema wrote a letter out to The Hague asking that they move the proceedings or the court itself altogether to a place closer to the region. This got a bit of coverage, got a few columns in the newspaper, and got, I think, a bit on TV and the likes. Then there was our foreign minister, I remember, asking that members of the AU sign a petition that would allow for President Kenyatta and Vice President Ruto not to have to appear at The Hague and carry on with the proceedings without actually being there. That was quite popular. But other than that, it hasn't really been like the biggest news out here, that's for sure.
All right, thank you very much, Gauri, and thank you for joining us on the program. Let's now cross to South Africa. Robert Chivambo, the anti-ICC narrative. I don't know whether it's in the media right there. I've seen a couple of articles. But in the leadership of South Africa, do you think that there is pressure to join this anti-ICC narrative, Robert?
Well, I think there's too much pressure right now at the moment in South Africa, especially in the government circles, to join the anti-ICC chorus. And I think this is informed by the fact that President Uhuru Kenyatta is wanted by the court. So there are heads of state who are saying that they are questioning the motive of the court behind this. And South Africa has joined that chorus, with President Jacob Zuma saying that he doesn't believe that the court can indict a sitting head of state. He went as far as asking that if he goes to the court and stand before the court to answer for his charges, who's going to run the court? So I think South Africa is bought into that particular spin, and they're joining that chorus.
Now, Nanjira, the rest of the continent, or at least a majority of them, seem to be buying into, like Robert from South Africa says, buying into the spin that Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto are victims of this process. Let me just read you a tweet to help you make base your final comments on, from Dennis Doksang. If a majority of 40 million Kenyans decided that they wanted to be led by a quote-unquote criminal, does the ICC have the right to deny them that? Now, over and above what we talked about sub judice, now this is, I think, a wider question about whether Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto should respect the jurisdiction of The Hague. If Kenyans chose these people as their leaders, should the ICC try and interfere with them? Nanjira, your final comments.
I mean, we did vote in spite of these cases being there, and it's not that the ICC has then come after them, so to speak, once they were in leadership. So there's a process that was ongoing, and now it seems that we're asking, should it be thwarted because we have voted as a people a certain way? And this brings the whole concept of what, and a lot of what's being put forth is that it's questioning the sovereignty of the country. But it goes back to what I said earlier. When we talk about the leadership of Kenya, are we talking about it based on individuals, or are we thinking about the institution? The onus is very much on the president and the deputy president to set a framework here about what we define leadership in Kenya to be. This is a very interesting time in Kenya for us to then shape what we define leadership to be. Is it about individuals who hold institutions and pass on certain principles that we have agreed to? Or is it that now we look and focus on the people, and wherever they go, we cry to the tune that either they're being, subdued or that kind of thing. And so here we are faced with a very, very sober decision and a sober conversation to have about what we define leadership to be in this country.
All right, Nanjira Sambuli, thank you very much for joining us on Africa Speaks. Nanjira Sambuli, of course, is a strategist and researcher for New Media. Thank you as well to our contributors from South Africa. That's Robert Chivambu, 98.7 of Power FM, and Tanzania. That's Gaurem D, the features editor and social media editor of Fema magazine. Now, this week, we're going to play you out with a great track. One of Africa's greatest exports, at least I think so, Femi Kuti. The son of Nigerian legend Fela Kuti has a not so new song that speaks to the fight that millions across Africa are facing every day. The fight against poverty. Until next week, people, I'm John Allen Namu, standing in for Joy Doreen Bira on Africa Speaks. Let's keep the conversation going. Hashtag Africa Speaks or at KTN Africa Speaks. You can tweet me at John Allen Namu. Thank you for joining us.